Today's presenter, Russell Jackman, is a graduate of the McGeorge School of Law, University of Pacific, and was admitted to the State Bar of California in June of 1994. He has been vice chair of the California State Bar's Law Practice Management and Technology Committee and a member since 1996. He works specifically with law offices and attorneys that need to get the most out of their legal technology and creates PowerPoint presentations for opening statements, direct examinations, and closing statements to be used in court, and can work with attorneys directly to filter their documents and images so that they have the most powerful visual presentations possible. He also works with law offices and solo attorneys to upgrade their older systems to new ones, troubleshooting existing setups, and training attorneys and staff on Microsoft programs. He is available for remote access consulting on technology-related issues, so please feel free to contact him at any time.
Hello, my name is Russell Jackman, and I'm speaking for the Center for Continuing Education today on how CRMS, Client Relationship Management Software, can help your legal practice. Now, I've been a legal technology consultant for basically since 1999. And I've been working for a lot of law offices, a lot of legal professionals, and folks who work with the legal professions, and helping them get their data organized and get them and their law offices taken care of as far as their technology is concerned. And probably the biggest transition that I've seen from when I started to where we are now is how much attorneys rely on a client management system and a customer relationship system of some type, as opposed to paper or just doing stuff off the top of their heads. I still do have a couple of attorney friends of mine that I know that they aren't clients of mine, but they're attorney friends of mine that do everything with a paper calendar. They just quote unquote don't trust it. They have basically a paper address book for a date book with all sorts of Post-its and pieces of paper flying around and things scratched out in it and all this other stuff, which for some people is the only way they can stay organized. And I can only shake my head and go, I don't know how you're able to manage your practice like that, but if you've been able to do it for 20, 30 years, God bless you. The rest of us, the concept of having something like this to manage your customers, your clients, your dates, your information, and being able to work with it is a huge benefit. And it's one of the reasons why computers basically were invented, and one of the reasons why they're so present in everything we do in so many different offices. So one of the big issues that all attorneys face is adhering to Rule 1.1 about competency, which is that a lawyer shall provide competent representation to a client. Now, and with the legal skill, knowledge, thoroughness, preparation reasonably necessary for presentation. Under the comments, what we see is that a lawyer shall provide competent representation to a client. Competent representation requires the legal knowledge, skill, thoroughness, preparation necessary for the representation. And under the comments, they talk about, for maintaining competence, that you need to keep abreast of the changes in the law and its practice, including the benefits and risks associated with relevant technology. So they added that as part of the rule of the comments to the rule of 1.1, because they want to find a way to make sure that attorneys were always staying on top of this sort of stuff. So as we see, the ABA Rule 1.1 focuses one of its comments on maintaining competence to be defined as maintaining the requisite knowledge, skill, and keeping abreast of changes in the law, including the benefits and risks associated with relevant technology, including the study and education with all legal education requirements to which the lawyer is subject. So they separate out technology as something that attorneys need to be on top of, and that they need to take advantage of what technology brings as a way to manage their practice. So let's talk about what CRMs are. It's just a basic overview of what they're all about. And that is, so we have a brief history of the customer or client relationship management system, which is that it's simply a way to manage customer data and relevant information. So that's the basic idea. And so the most oldest and most trusted version of that is the old black book that people had for telephone numbers, and the old paper calendar, the big desk calendar that, you know, was on top of a desk that people wrote in stuff, or they wrote stuff in on their wall calendar to remind them of particular dates. And then they had a Rolodex, you know, perhaps, you know, or some sort of file thing where they would put people's business cards and alphabetize them that way. And I mean, it was a very basic system, but it worked obviously for many years, and still does for some people. And obviously, you know, its advantages is, you know, it can't be hacked by a hacker, and it can't be you can't lose it technically if you get a virus or something like that. But otherwise, its usefulness is pretty limited. And so in the 80s and 90s, you saw a greater use of attorneys first using very basic database systems like Microsoft Access and even Excel or other spreadsheets. The very first spreadsheets were used as databases, just as a simple name, address, phone number, and even, you know, when they had such things, email or a fax number or something like that. And so you would have those things set up to be able to manage office, you know, data, but it was pretty inflexible and had no real specialty element to it. And especially with something like Access, setting up your own Microsoft Access database. I'm not sure if you've ever had the pleasure of trying to set up your own database from absolute scratch, where you have to name every single field and you have to define every single character width, and then manage how the data is being sent to different spreadsheets and or databases for you to work, the actual data that comes in, how you actually manage that information and use that in different things like Word or so forth. It was a lot of work. It was something that was more work, except for a lot of work, except for like offices that had really extensive amounts of data and were able to hire a programmer and engineer not only to create the database, but then the people who could do the raw effort of moving the existing data into the database, which was kind of like watching, you know, people row boats, you know, those giant galleys across the ocean. You just had so many people just hand typing in data and stuff like that. It was something that an average law office couldn't do, and certainly not one that could be done easily by solo practitioners or small firms. But then we saw, because Microsoft saw how much people were using Access to do the same things over and over again, working on their same database, that they would came up with their own program called Outlook, and also a rival program called ACT. And those two programs were made to recreate what the most common things were by accessing Excel and what people were using those programs to kind of do, but weren't actually able to accomplish. And so a lot of companies just, that's one of the reasons why they still use Outlook. They still use it. Not as a testimonial for it, but they already have, they've always had the Microsoft Office suite in their office. So they've had Outlook, it's available, and they've used it because it syncs with different devices that they have. Or in the case of ACT, they've set up a bunch of custom fields that aren't easily translated into other databases that they have. So you have a situation where some law firms, some companies are kind of locked into working with ACT, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. And so you'll see Outlook obviously is still in place today. ACT is kind of dying out. It's still there. It's turned into more of a sales-based program than it is for law offices. I don't think a lot of law offices use ACT as a customer management or client management system, but you still may find it in certain places. And what we're also seeing is that a large number of companies are using Salesforce and marketing CRMs, and that's why I use the term client and customer data sort of interchangeably, because Salesforce is basically what something you would have like this, but it's on steroids. It's a database management, but it is so complicated. It has so many elements to it. It takes such a level of specialization to make a Salesforce platform work for a law office that I don't know of any law offices that are trying to use a customized Salesforce database to manage their data. It's like using, a hammer to try to flip a pancake. It's the wrong tool for the job. And that's why it's better not to try to use something that was made for sales or marketing as a CRM and just try to adapt it directly to law office work. But there are certainly ones like HubSpot that are popular online, and other client management. There are other customer management systems that exist, but you want to be able to have things that you'll see. There's certain features by law office specific software that are nice to have, and since we are all attorneys here getting our MCLEs, I think you'll see later. I'll talk about some other programs that have other features that make it better and are things that are very, very handy or essential for law offices to have. And so that's the one thing that we have seen is that because lawyers have specific needs for a client management system, it is not necessarily the same ones that you have with sales. They have created specialized ones. And again, we'll take a look at some coming later in this talk. And there are many to choose from. That's the other thing that I want to make a disclaimer of and make sure people understand that I am not licensed or a salesperson for any particular CRM. And so I am just trying to show a survey of the things that are typical and the more popular programs, but I'm certainly not saying to anyone that any one of these programs is better than the other or more helpful or has features that are superior to the ones that I'm comparing to. In fact, a lot of them I think you'll see are very similar in how they work. And so there's sort of a common bond between all of them. And a lot of it comes down to price, comes down to familiarity, comes down to how people like the different interface, because the different interface, you can drive a Honda, you can drive a Toyota. Some people like where the dashboard lights are on the Toyota versus where they are on the Honda, or they like the look of the gauges or whatever. That look and feel can make a difference, and that's often what makes the difference between a lot of these different programs, less than the functionality. So let's talk about how the CRM process actually works. All CRMs start with the client being the very first thing. Without a client, you can't have anything else. You have to get the client, you have to get the client's information. You have to get a complete amount of information for you to be able to manage your client's matter. Because all clients have matters. What else are they coming into your law office for? From the client comes the matter. And the matter is, of course, why the client is there to see you. But not clients may have more than one matter. So you may or may not just have one single one, but it's important that you at least associate the matter with the client. And so that there is that sort of relationship between the two of them. Then finally, all matters have events. Now, events aren't always court appearances. Events can be things like meetings, telephone conversations, research, lunches, phone calls, Zoom conversations, email, conversations that are going back and forth. So events are vital to timekeeping and being able to then turn it into billing matters. To bill a matter, of course, an event then gets billed to the matter, and then the matter is, of course, associated with the client. So the client obviously then pays the bill. And so what we really are seeing is that a interrelationship between all of these things, that the client, from the client, you can find out what the events are. From the event, you can find out what the matter is. From the matter, you can find out who the client is, what events are associated with it. From the client, you can see what matter is associated, what events are. So it's a circular process that also, goes back and forth too for everything. And so the right kind of CRM that you get, you're able to associate all three of these things easily and without having to, do a lot of searching and trying to get a needle in a haystack type thing, feeling that you're just overwhelmed. There's just so many things to have to choose from. And you don't know where it is. If you build a database where you don't know where something is, then you didn't build the right database, which brings me to CRM strategies and advice, which is you need to find an interface that works for you. I think that's perhaps the most important thing. That's why there are different interfaces for almost the same information. Some people are really, really, really used to Outlook, and trying to get them to work off of Outlook just doesn't happen. Some people are really used to Abacus, or the way that Amicus works, or the interface that you have with Google, Docs and Google Drive. And so trying to teach people out of a particular interface that they're used to and into a new one has challenges. Not that it isn't always rewarding. Sometimes people find a new interface and feel, oh my gosh, this is what I've been looking for my whole life. I was always bothered that, Outlook did it this way, or that, Abacus did it that way, or that Amicus did it this way, or that Needles did it that way. And boy, this is so much easier to use, or these features, really unlock things that I wanted to do with it, but I couldn't do it before because I didn't have the ability to do so. Maybe one of the most important parts of setting up a database And if you get anything out of this entire lecture, if there's one thing that I think is the most important thing in setting up a database, why I put an exclamation next to it, is the consistent use of names. When I was a professor of computer applications, paralegals, and when we do our database lecture, I carry this through even to this day, is I would ask, obviously you folks are listening to this on the web and so forth, so I can't ask individuals that are right in front of me, but I would ask the students, what building, where is this classroom? And the first person that I would ask would say, well, we're in Cal State Hayward something building room 284. And the next person I'd say, what room are we in? Well, we're in the science lab at Cal State Hayward room 284. And then I asked another person, and the other person added what floor we were on. And so I said, we're all in the same room, but you just gave 4 different types of description as to where this room actually was. And when that happens in a database, your database falls apart. And you'd say, well, you know, we can always do a search. And that, a lot of times, if you name things inconsistently, it doesn't matter what whether you call a doctor a DR period or DOCTOR and you capitalize the D. It doesn't matter which one you use. But if you always use DR dot, if you search for the word doctor, you will probably not find what you're looking for. Now, the problem with going with a DR period is that anytime you run into somebody that has the abbreviation for drive, that may also come up in your search. And so if you're going to use DR period for drive, maybe you don't want to use DR period for doctor. And yes, it takes that kind of plotting out when you're setting up a database and entering in your client's information to do that. Otherwise, I have seen so many databases with duplicates, but they aren't really duplicates. That my client will say, I've got this name entered in 5 times in my database. And when I look in and I go, can I just deduplicate it? And I go, these aren't really duplicates because on one of them, you just have the fax number. On this other one, you have the phone number. On this one, you have the phone number and the address. And on this one, you just have the email. So you entered it in 5 different times with different, and in this one, you include the middle name when you don't include the middle name on this one. And this one, you have the title on at the end, but you don't have the title on these. So a database is only as smart as yourself. And if you enter it in multiple times to change one bit of data in the database will say, well, this is a different entry. And will make what seems to us a duplicate, but to the computer is not a duplicate because a period is changed or a comma is changed or a doctor is spelled DR or room is spelled RM or you put a number sign in front of the room instead of not putting a number sign in front of the room. So these little inconsistencies where you are entering in stuff, especially if you don't have anything digital and you're starting from scratch, sometimes happens, people lose databases all the time due to viruses not backing up, or they get corrupted, or they can't transfer them from an older database. It just won't work. Or, as most likely the case, maybe they didn't have a database to begin with. It's all Rolodex cards, index cards. Again, starting from absolute scratch. So if you need to make sure that all of those names that you're working with are consistent. If you don't have consistent names, I guarantee you your database will get out of control fast. The data that does not match up will be harder to find. You won't be able to make consistent searches. It will be very difficult. Now, another part and that we see more, and this is one thing that separates a lot of client management systems, the ones for sales versus the ones for law offices, the client management systems, is that and case management systems, is that they integrate images and scans so that you can build a document library that is associated with that particular client. So by going and viewing a client's information, you don't have to track down all the documents that are important to that client. Although most law offices have an accompanying Word document file or a file folder on their main server that has their client's name and all of that to it. If you are working with a client that has multiple matters, multiple cases that you're working with, this can still be helpful by separating out those documents specifically to that particular matter under, most CRMs will allow you to attach matters to a particular documents to a particular matter and images to a particular matter. So one thing that may be like an accident case versus say a contract case, it's someone who is suing under both pretenses. Then you would, when you go and you check on the matters and you check to see the documents for the breach of contract case, you get a totally different set of documents, things that are separated out, versus when you look at a personal injury case, you see the photos of the injury and the doctor's reports and all that stuff. So you don't have to spend as much time trying to sort it out on the server level and where the documents are stored, although I still recommend that, but you can do it through the CRM as well. And tagging emails and associating emails and getting them into the service, into the CRM is an easier task too, and harder to do with something like Outlook or those sort of things. Now, it's really important when you're setting up something to integrate the images and scans that you understand how the CRM indexes these items. In other words, how do you find it again? And how do you associate it with the matter, the name, the event, the calendared event? How can you associate all of those, or one or the other, or a combination of those three? Because the ease of how you can do that, or the complication in how you do that, goes a long way to how capable you are of working with this program. If it's really hard to do, really confusing for you, then maybe not the program for you. Is your database too detailed? Now, I have had clients before say, well, I'll just include everything. I'll make sure that I don't get anything wrong. So I will make, a field for absolutely everything. Well, first of all, one, when you make too many fields, that means that every entry has that many fields associated with it, which isn't helpful when you're trying to necessarily sort your way through. And sometimes fields get too complicated in the sense that you're not sure what they are later when you go back and try to fill them out. You're like, well, this one, it's very similar to that one. Should I enter it in this field? Should I enter in that field? Or should I enter into both? When you're in a situation like that, guarantee you your database will get out of control. And also, when you throw that many fields into something, then you have a lot of chances that people are going to miss fields when they're entering it. And you're also going to have people entering in sometimes the wrong data, just flat out, just because it's so huge. And it makes your database much bigger and harder to handle. If you have too many fields and you're not using those fields do take up space do take up room. They do take up energy of the computer to manage it. And so it's not a great idea to just try to overkill and throw every single field in. You want just enough fields, not too many, but also you don't want because too many options can create confusion. But if your database is not detailed enough, that's maybe worse, because you can always get rid of too many fields, especially ones that are empty. Of course, that's what does become a problem, is if you have, people entering in stuff that you thought was an empty field and instead has important data on it, and you have to move it back to a particular field so that you can eliminate that field and still keep the data that's in it, because they thought it was one thing but leading to another. But if your database is not detailed enough, then you're going to have some really big problems, especially after you've entered in a lot of information. Because I see a lot of times when people are setting up their database, they will use a name field versus first name, last name, initials, title, etc. And the reason why having a name field is not so good, because people don't know whether to file it in as a first name, last name, first name, initial first, whatever. What happens when you have three names? You get a jumble of, and you can't sort it very easily. If you have a first name field and a last name field, you can sort by last name, which is fine. And that, alphabetizes much easier, and you can move field around and so forth. But if you just have a field that's just called name, and do people put their titles there? Do they put their, whether they're a junior or a senior, and so forth. So if you don't have enough details, and then let's say you've already entered in 1,000 names, you realize, oh, I need a first name and a last name category. You're going to probably have to rework your database. So you realize you left out, for address, you didn't include city and state and zip code. And later you want to sort things by city and state and zip code, to see how your marketing is going or how you're getting clients from different areas. But it's going to be harder to do because you just have a thing that says address. And is their mail? What if their mailing address is different than their street address? They just give you their street address. You want to have a slot for a mailing address as well, or even the option to make it the same one. Those are important things, again, in setting up your database, because what I've always said is that a pyramid is only as good as its base. That's why you had a lot of work going into the preparation of the Great Pyramids of Egypt and South America and so forth. Because if you don't have the base set up correctly, everything you pile up on top of it is going to be crooked, it's going to be inefficient, is going to be not effective and not do what you want it to. And if you don't test it, especially when you're putting the building blocks together, the very base, you'll be sorry. You always want to test your database before doing that data. I can't emphasize that enough. It goes right along with the consistent use of names and the consistent naming of data that is entering into the system. Is that you've got to test your database for doing mass. Put in 10 names, put in 100 names, maybe. That's, not too much time to enter. It depends on how detailed it is. And then fool around with it and start, maybe associating matters with it, associating events with it, see how it works, see if you can find what you're looking for, and you can see how it's associated with the documents and all that. Give it a trial run before you move everything into the database and then realize, oh my gosh, I forgot to add this in. Oh my gosh, this is the wrong field to put this information in. oh my gosh, I don't really like this interface. I'm going to have to do this, 1,000 times, 10,000 times. Is this really the right software for me? Maybe I need to experiment with another software package, see if this is really is this as hard everywhere I go? Then you have to think, okay, maybe this is the way I have my data assembled, not, in a way that makes sense. So, there's the time to review all of that where you start building, mid-level and you get about halfway towards the top of the pyramid, or even worse, actually at the very top of the pyramid, you try using it and it crashes. You can't use it at all. The secretary says it's a mess and I hate this thing. Why did you put this in here? And I've heard all these things from different clients over the years that have instituted various changes in their CRM and trying to change how they manage their client information. And it's something you don't want to do overnight, something you don't want to do without researching. It's certainly not something you want to roll out and then have your doubts. When you roll it out, you want to be as sure as you can possibly be that the data is going to work for you when you have it, when you start running. So here's some things. Now, again, people have used Outlook for a long time, and people have used ACT, and even the brutal reality of just using an Excel spreadsheet as a database. But if you are working with someone that uses, say, Google Drive or Outlook or something like that, or you yourself are using it, you should be aware that there are things that CRMs focus on, such as the cloud capacity, and that there is a streamlined entry system that the CRMs are all trying to work on to try to make it so that it works with your law office, and your law office data. And that cloud capacity is important too, because if you have a system that is locally based and you have to come into the office to get that information, and you're not able to calendar a case or see what matters are important unless you're logged in physically at your office, it's going to be a problem. We've seen, obviously, in this COVID situation that we have now, people can't get into the office. They can't be there presently. And they need a way to work without having to necessarily physically be at the office. So a CRM is obviously going to be a paper calendar every time. And in doing so, it does mean that your ability, once you know how it works, it will make the time entry system more streamlined. The matters are being calculated, the time that's put into each matter and the billing hour for each matter, especially if you have multiple people at the office that earn different wage levels. Like senior partner maybe gets $4.75 an hour, and paralegals get, billed at $1.50 an hour, and secretary time is $50 an hour, or something along those lines. You can break down a bill and say, okay, I spent, senior partner spent, 4 hours on this and meetings and things like that. That generated, 5 hours or 10 hours of paperwork, which paralegal did 2 hours of research, and the secretary did 8 hours of, typing and document organization or whatever. And you can then bill it at those different rates to the client, and the client gets a breakdown of the bill and sees exactly how much they're paying for, which is what clients need for clarity to understand where the money goes that they're spending on a particular case. Also, when you have the CRM, naturally these days, the CRMs tie into the database of documents and images, as I mentioned, so you don't have to necessarily hunt them down in the documents folder, and then the cases folder, then the client's name, then the client's matter, then under images. You don't have to do all that. When you go and you click on the client, that client's information comes up. All the things associated with that client, including emails and documents, and all of that comes up on the client's ID. That's how the CRM should work. It doesn't work. Being able to do that, it's too difficult. Maybe it's not the right CRM. A big issue for a lot of law offices is that where is it question? Who has it? What's the most recent version question? And so document management, especially in bigger offices, is really vital. And being able to know that what you're looking at is the most recent version of everything. These documents are the most recent documents to handle for this client. That this is the latest, these are the right photos, and that here are the pleadings, here are the summaries, and here's the relevant law, and all of that stuff is collected in one place, and you can look at it just by clicking on the client, and all that stuff comes up, saves a lot of time and allows attorneys the mobility to work outside the office, and all they need is an internet connection and any sort of, computer that gets on the internet, and they can, if the CRM has the correct cloud capacity, you can get all that information from online and not have to and work with it, look at it. You can edit it, that sort of thing, without having to worry about, oh, I have to check into the office to get this stuff. And then CRM, even though it's a client management system, is also a customer management system in that it ties in with marketing efforts and productivity. You can create, most CRMs have the ability to then graph what matters have come in to which attorneys, who's spending the most time, who's bringing in the most income to a firm, where are clients coming from, what are they responding to, what matters are being brought more towards the firm versus what types of matters aren't. A whole host of demographics can be brought in when you use the CRM. You can keep track of so many different things that you're not capable of doing when you just do everything by paper. And of course, you have lower malpractice risk for missed dates and matters. So when they almost all malpractice companies will ask you what your calendaring system is, and but of course the proof is in the pudding. And you can say you have certain systems, but if you don't really know how they work, if you don't know how to use them, and you miss a date, and you miss a matter, or you don't get in touch with the client, then you will be sued for malpractice. And doing so, then your rates will go up. So it's important that, not only that you have it, but it's the kind of system that you trust and want to use, because your malpractice rates could depend on it. Then finally, CRM feature that is super important, and I don't know how you do it effectively without a CRM, is doing a conflict of interest check. So when all the attorneys are registered in your CRM and they enter in the matters that they worked on in the past, you're able to then do a very quick conflict of interest check by seeing if the attorneys for your firm have already represented somebody or dealt with a matter that would put them in conflict of interest. If you have a great history built into the system, and you have a recording of all the things that your attorney has worked on while being at your firm, then you are able to run that conflict of interest check and be able to see whether or not, with much more certainty than just asking the attorney to remember. If you're able to do that, then you're able to avoid having somebody removed because of a potential conflict of interest. So it's to automate that is a big plus, and most CRM features will allow you to do that. Other factors are the calendaring system. You need to review the calendaring system to see what you think of it and how you like how it integrates, how it works. Is it easy to understand how the date entry system works and how you associate it with different matters and different clients? Does it have a billing system built in, or does it include a billing system module so you can send this information easily from the CRM and events and matters that are associated with the clients into a billing system so that can be automated too? What sort of track record do they have? That is a really important element to before you go fully invest in a system. There are a lot of just for myself researching this, I noticed there were probably about 20 companies that have some type of legal specific client case management system available. And everything ranging from the ones that are here, ones that are strictly online, to ones that are open source and work. And I don't cover any Mac-based systems on this particular talk, but there certainly are ones, of course, the ones that are online don't really function. Ones that are web-based, doesn't matter whether you're Mac or a PC. There's systems, and then there's ones that are hosted on virtual servers. So it's important to pick someone that maybe that you know, an attorney that you worked with or seen working with it and likes that system and has had it for a little while, because putting a lot into a system that may not have support or may go out of business in a few years wouldn't do anybody. And support options are critical, especially when getting it set up, so that you get it set up the right way, not fly by the seat of your pants and set it up the wrong way. Support options are pretty critical. I have always said that you don't want to get a company 9 to 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time hours. No offense to you folks on Eastern Standard Time, that cuts off for us in California at 2 p.m. Pacific Time, and a lot of things happen in business on the West Coast from 2 to 5 p.m., which is, trust me, one of the main reasons why things find a way to break down when they know that it's on the East Coast support time. It waits till 2:01 p.m. Pacific Standard Time to break down here in the West. So you want the ability to reach support at least till the end of typical business time in your area, but it's probably good you can find companies that are open with a 24/7 support. Now, how is your data kept now is important to understand, because you need to look into how it can be migrated. I did have one client who hired me to migrate their ACT database, and unfortunately, their ACT database was from the year 2000. This was like 2 years ago. So they went 18 years without updating their ACT database, and they kept the same software with it. They kept running the same software, and eventually that software just wasn't compatible with Windows 10. It just wouldn't work, and so they were having a lot of errors, a lot of crashes. So we tried to migrate their data to a CRM. The Problem was they had, over the 20 years of working, or 18 years they've worked with ACT, created all sorts of custom fields with ACT. And those fields were absolutely impossible to map. We could not find, we tried to make custom fields in a bunch of different CRMs, and the data would not be consistent, or they had trouble interpreting the data once it was moved over to a custom field, because that the fields that they had in ACT actually interacted with other fields to create like a base. It was integrated with the calendar that ACT had, so that every time they did something based on this one field, it would change something in the calendar and so forth. So it was so complicated and been engineered in such a difficult way, we basically had to just move databases from one version of ACT, literally or two versions of ACT at a time. We had to get like 2002 version of ACT, we get 2004 version of ACT, 2006 version of ACT, 2008 version of ACT, so forth. We could finally, and just migrating the data one at a time, so it could finally be migrated to the most recent version of ACT. We were happy once we got it to the most recent version of ACT. We just said, that's where we're going to have to leave it. And so it wasn't a perfect solution. They wanted to get it out of ACT into CRM, but their data was locked in because of legacy fields that couldn't be translated. Now, who will be using the system and under what conditions? Again, we've seen now a bigger push towards working at home. And so because people are working at home, not checking into central law office, do they have the kind of systems at home that are powerful enough to run these kind of databases? And are they going to have an internet connection strong enough to deal with these databases? It's important to take those into account. Security levels are also important to understand. How strong is your data secured in these databases? Does it have the ability to encrypt the data at rest when it's not in transit from one computer to the other? How is the data being secured? And then for both inside and outside the firm, inside the firm is an important element as well. How secure is the data if you don't want secretaries to read it, you don't want paralegals to read it? How secure can you make data within the firm and assign different levels of security to different personnel in the firm? And then, of course, the most important thing of all is how much time will it take to train and familiarize with the system. And I see a lot of law offices making the mistake of trying to really force in a new database without giving that kind of time and just say, oh, they'll figure it out. They'll learn it on the fly. They'll understand what I meant with this, or they'll understand what the engineers meant by that. And most of the time, everything I said there doesn't turn out to be the case. They don't learn it on the fly. They don't just figure it out. They don't understand what was supposed to be put in to a particular field, or if they guess wrong, and they put in the wrong things in that field, because their response is that, well, nobody told us how this system worked. Nobody told us that it was supposed to be DR dot for doctor instead of DOCTOR, or no one told us that we need to spell the word drive out, or straight, instead of state. These are all things that, if the ground rules are set ahead of time and you train the people that are working with it, they're familiar with it, then these things don't happen. But it's surprising how many times a database is incorporated in law offices and they don't take that into account. So basic CRM would be doing things like Google or Outlook. It's got the simplest features of CRM. You've got name fields, you've got note fields, you've got events, you've got a calendar. It's searchable and it's cloud-based if you're using Google or if you're using the calendar that's as part of Office 365. Syncing to phone and tablets are relatively easy, and the main attraction using Outlook and or Google Apps as a CRM is that it's low cost if you have it, but or mostly it's included or free. So, for instance, Google Apps, I mean, you don't, to run a basic account, will just manage your calendar and your contacts, and then sync it with your phone. Doesn't cost anything at all. In fact, you have to have basically a Google calendar, a Google account to make an Android phone sync, unless you buy a commercial program to sync Outlook with your phone, or you use Office 365 on your phone. So, but that's why I think we've seen a lot of attorneys use the Outlook and Google apps. They're still very popular because if you're doing it on a very basic level, and let's say you're not trying to calendar things due to rules, you don't have a very active court-based practice. For a lot of attorneys, what Outlook provides and what Google Apps provide as far as the CRM goes is enough. And at least you're using the power of the cloud, you're using the power of your phone, and you're using your power, the decentralization of information, so that you can find what you need without having to check into the office all the time. I just remember how many times people would lose business that I know of, would say, oh, well, I have to check back in to my office before I can calendar something, that I have to check with my secretary. I have to check with, I have to go into the office, check my calendar. Well, if you do that, you're not able to get business right then and there. You're not able to sign up a client right then and there. You may lose that client. So it's important that you have some system that you can use to be able to do it. And then a lot of people are using OneDrive and Google Drive as document management. Again, it's inexpensive or free depending on what level you use it at. And you can share your documents with it. We do a whole talk on how Outlook and how OneDrive and how the Google apps can be used in a legal sense. So I won't go deeply into that here, but just know that, if nothing else, if you're really reluctant to use any kind of a CRM based on price, you could still look at Outlook or Google Apps as a way to do it without breaking the bank. Now, there are some disadvantages to Google and Outlook, and that is it's not really made for legal matters. So you have to either make a bunch of custom fields or just live without some of those functions. It doesn't have an automated calendar to events, to matter types. That's one of the big deals in some of the things such as Abacus and PC law and some other specific law office related CRMs, is that you can create a rule. And so when you schedule, say, a divorce, or let's say you schedule a divorce, well, what it would do is it would say, this is when you have to give notice to this party. It would automatically calculate. So you'd say, client signs the agreement on day 1. Well, day 19 has to have a discovery sent out to the other parties. Day 32 needs to have this done. Day 40 needs to have this done. And you can plot out, it will populate the calendar all the way up to trial. And then even situations where trial is happening, you could even pre-program things based on local rules so that we'll still calculate out that as well, depending on the system you're using. But you can't do that without working with Google Apps. It's just not made for it. And you can't base a calendar off of rules. This is really a means to do that very easily. Not all data can be imported using into fields. That is one of the problems with the Competitive Act. We weren't able to do that. And then some systems will trap you by custom fields. But the fields are so custom made, but they just don't work with anything but the actual manufacturer of the software itself. So if you don't stay with the software, you won't be able to use the custom field. So let's talk a little bit about some other popular systems. I'm just giving some real quick screenshots as to what they look like. I think you'll see that there are a lot of common threads between the systems. For instance, you'll see that in Abacus, they all have what you consider a dashboard when you first log in. And from there, you can see the cases that matter, the clients that matter, the calendaring matters that are, and tasks that are due. And then from there, you can break it down so that you can look at the matter itself and look at things like the time that is spent on it. If you see on the right there, you have a client breakdown showing things like the information that's pertinent to the client and how much time was spent on it for what particular elements. And then that all ties into a calendar, which, is the kind of thing that we're used to seeing. If you are used to Outlook or any kind of an electronic calendar, you'll see they'll often color code matters based, especially if you're working with multiple attorneys, then you'll have the different attorneys have colors corresponding to who they are and what they're actually doing. And you could filter out certain calendars and certain matters that you're only looking at the things that for one client or one attorney, so forth. So this is, again, that whole circular concept that from a dashboard, you could go to your tasks, go to your cases, go to your clients, go to your calendar. Or you could go to your calendar and you could go to your client, go to your matter. Or you can go to your matter, you can go to your client, you can go to your calendar. Anywhere you go, you're linked into what's important, and you can find why that person is your client and what matters ahead of them and what is important to that matter, no matter where you are. And we're going to see that thread in some of these other software systems. So here's Amicus Attorney. Some people like the Amicus Attorney interface more. They feel it's friendlier. Maybe it's not as it doesn't thrust as much data at you up front, and so it's more categorized. So again, there's a reason why people have different types of software. Some people like the billing system more, and they're able to get more out of it. Here on the right, you see if you click on a particular matter, it shows you the different documents that are associated with it and the different people that are associated with this case, whether they're clients or defendant or witness. And then you click on those names, you'll get a Rolodex-like card that will tell you their data and information, how you contact them. And you can, there's a file facts area, so you can find out things like reports, notes, related files, events, that sort of thing. So visually, some people really like the way Amicus Attorney is set up, and others, it's not their cup of tea, or it's too simplistic, or it's too graphical base for their liking. And that's why you have something like Needles, which is, I think, a lot more bare bones. It takes a lot of effort to set up Needles because it comes with almost nothing preset. But that's one of the benefits of Needles, is that the customization level of Needles is almost unlimited. It's so easy. It's easy once you know how to do it and what everything stands for and what all the settings are about, to set up your own database quickly and to create your own categories and all this sort of stuff. So I know some attorneys that are really thrilled with needles, and it runs on a very minimal level of hardware, so it can run on older systems without any problem. But I've always, for me, felt it was too Spartan and took too much work to set up a needles database compared to what most attorneys I know need them for. I think it's a little bit on the tough side, but for a larger firm that's able to dedicate someone to set up a needles database for all the attorneys that are in and import that data, it can do a lot. And you can break down, as we see here, like an individual attorney's information about what cases they're working on, how much time they're dedicated to certain cases, what kind of cases they're intaking, and get a lot of information based on what attorneys are doing. And as long as they are recording all that information with needles, it can really give a strong view of what's going on. And then there's Clio. A number of clients that are really thrilled with Clio. Clio is kind of in between what you get with Amicus. It's got sort of a friendlier, it's a more business-like looking template, but it's not as Spartan as, say, Needles. So Clio to me is sort of an in-between between Amicus and Needles. Some of my clients are really happy with it and use it, extensively, and others feel that it just doesn't go far enough, or they don't like necessarily having an online version of it. But most of my clients that have used Clio have been able to use it relatively effectively. So here's a breakdown of things like an invoice. The invoice is set up, and this is a calendaring matters on the right here. This is your basic dashboard for a particular case, showing things as far as what's important, how much trust funds there are versus the balance outstanding for this firm, obviously, and then contacts and timeline, what you've done. The timeline is always helpful with the CRM too, is that all of them allow you to be able to see what's been done on the case since the case came in. So, and most of them allow you to filter it so you can see multiple attorneys have been working on a case, or you want to see how much paralegal time was spent on it. You can do that too. Again, if all the information is in your CRM, you can pinpoint it. If you don't have it in your CRM, it's not that helpful. And then finally, we have My Case. Again, if you're seeing a trend and you're seeing some familiar things that make these things look a lot like the other one, there's a reason why. There's only so many ways you can necessarily package legal information. And so My Case is another case management system. You see, here's its dashboard, things like adding new appointments and new tasks and new documents to particular clients and matters and so forth. You have cases listed here. Then when you have cases, you associate them with a calendared matter or matters that are listed here. And again, same circular concept, same thing that we've seen from program to program. So it really comes down to you trying these things and deciding which one has the right look and feel for you. They all have the capacity to do what you want. Can you get it to do the things that you want? That's the big question. So for conclusions, reach out, research, and try the different CRMs. Not just you, but your staff as well. Are there similar offices, your size and practice, that use this software? What do they use? How much do they like it? Okay, because that's always a great way to sort of test the waters to see what sort of issues, any other law offices of your size you have gotten into when they set up their CRM. Make a decision to move to a CRM and then stick to it. Once you have made that decision, once you are putting in that data into your system, it's not a good time to then say, when you're halfway through, you want to switch to another one. You really need to have made that choice before you even put in one piece of data. You really need to determine that that is the CRM for you, because changing databases is expensive, hard work, and can really be discouraging when you say the grass is greener on the other side, you jump over, then you realize, oh, wait a minute, that first database did A, B, and C, and I missed that. I want to go back to that original database. I have had clients do that, and it's a very costly and annoying circumstance. Test, test, test before you import all your data into a new system. Said it, repeated it, and I'm repeating it one more time. You can fix stuff when it's 10, when it's 50, when it's 100. You can't fix it when it's 1,000, 10,000, 100,000. Okay? I've had clients that have had to figure out how to fix a database with 100,000 entries that didn't work the way they wanted it to. And that's not where you want to be. That's an expensive thing to have to do. Don't over customize to start, but don't limit yourself too much either. Leave some room to add some fields or tags, okay? Ones that, you know, if you're not sure about, you think that maybe a certain number of clients might need that field, you can add that in later and it won't kill you to, you know, then have to fill in 20 or 30 extra fields that you weren't counting on. It's just when you miss something that's so important, like, you know, last name or zip code. I've had clients forget to put in zip code, and then, you know, they couldn't mail anything out, you know, or they put in email, but they don't separate it out between a work and personal email, and then they, you know, want those two things to be separated. Well, then that creates a problem. So you want to be able to know that you've got your essential fields. Look at some of the other databases that are set up, especially if you can check out a CRM from a law office that does similar to what you do. See what fields they do incorporate, and see if take note of those and say, should we add those fields to our thing, or do they come already built in? Because that will save you a lot of hassle in the long run. Train everyone on how it works and how to get support. There's obviously going to be times where things don't go right in the database when you're dealing, especially with large ones. It's important to know how to get support with it. What happens if it crashes? What happens if it doesn't load? How often are they doing updates? How can I find the data if I need it to back it up? And how do I restore it if I need to restore it? So understanding how it works, so it's not just something that you hire somebody from outside the firm to do all the data entry, and then once they leave, nobody knows how to enter in a new client, is not good. People need to know how it works. It's better if it's more than just one person. It's really good if you can get the attorneys themselves to understand truly how it works, so they don't have somebody navigate it for them, so they can enter in their own time, they can enter in their own matters, and they could work outside the office by themselves on the system because they understand it better. And then finally, if a system is not working, don't fit a square peg into a round hole. Don't keep pushing that CRM. If it's not working for you, you haven't entered in 100,000 clients yet, find a way to get out of it and say, okay, this isn't working, especially during the testing period. If you see things that are red flags for you, don't say, we'll get used to it. People will work around it. It's something that, we can deal with some other time, because the odds are you'll get to a pressure situation where you've built so much into the CRM, you will have forgotten to deal with that issue. And then that issue will come bite you in the butt right when you're ready to go to court. So you want to avoid all those things. Find the CRM that's right for you and make that a big part of how you manage your practice, and how you run a competent law. If you have any questions, you can contact me at the following information, and I really appreciate you listening to my talk today. Thank you very much.